Welcome everyone to our 2020 virtual Bold Career Conference. If you are here, you are joining the Breakout 1, Ignite Your Passion, Change the World, Policy and Law breakout session. We have three amazing, wonderful women here that I'm so excited to moderate this panel for and to talk through with their experiences in their sectors. So I'm going to give them a really quick introduction, and they're going to tell us all about them, about themselves. And then we're going to take some questions in the Q&A, which we will be administering around 1:45. So feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat. First, we have Miss Gwendolyn Keys Fleming. We have Courtney Davenport, and we have Victoria Salami. So we have a couple moderated questions that we're going to start with. Feel free to answer any questions that you like. And if you don't want to, you do not have to. And, we're just going to keep it moving and keep it light and fresh. And I'm so excited. So our first question here today is, was there a person or a defining moment in your life that ignited the passion to do the work that you do? And how did you determine your career path?
For me, there was interesting. There were two things in particular, and they seemed like negatives or one seemed like a negative at the time, and it actually wasn't. When my first year out of law school, you may know, one of the big things is to try to get either a clerkship with a judge or get on with a law firm. And with my finance degree from Douglas, I was going for that law firm position. I had to have sent out, I can't tell you how many letters requesting interviews. I, got several interviews. No one wanted to hire me my first summer out of law school. And so I was pretty dejected. But it actually turned out to be a great thing because I was determined. And as you may have heard in the last session, that's when I started calling up and finding places where I can volunteer. And I happened to volunteer at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, and that led to a 16-year career in prosecution and litigation. And it was a big turning point for me. The other, in terms of entering politics, occurred in 1994. I was an assistant solicitor, my very first job right out of law school, and my boss was running for office, and he actually said, I can see it as plain as day in the corner of the office, telling me that he was not going to run for re-election in 1998, and he thought by then that DeKalb would be ready for its first African-American, first female Solicitor General. And I immediately was like, oh no, I don't want to do politics. I want to be at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and had all of these other excuses. And then when I looked at the field of candidates, I was the only one that had worked in the office before, knew the folks, knew how the office worked, which also meant that I knew where things might be able to be done differently or better. And I was just like, I think I'm the best qualified. So what looked like a pipe dream 4 years before became a determining factor in putting me on the path into politics.
Well, for me, I always knew I wanted to go to law school. So the defining moment for me would be, I did a program while I was at Douglas. It was a pre-legal program at Seton Hall Law School. And the program pretty much gives you an inside view into what it would be like for your first year of law school. You take classes, you meet federal judges, you take law school exams, you do essentially all the stuff that you would do as a first year law student. You do trial, oral argument, which is moot court. And my defining moment that really put the nail on the head for me that I need to be an attorney, that I want to go to law school, I had a moot court, which is pretty much, for those who don't know moot court, it's pretty much you're standing before a judge advocating your position on a particular issue, area of the law for your client. And I did a moot court with a federal judge, and it was like an employment discrimination made up case, and it was like sexual harassment, and I gave my all into that moot court oral argument. And the federal judge said to me, "You were made for this." And to me, hearing that as a young African-American woman coming from a community that I didn't see a lot of African-American attorneys or attorneys at all, that really resonated with me that, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can use my voice in this way. I think I can do this. These feelings that I've been having that I want to go into this space was solidified for me in that moment. And that was, I think, so that was my sophomore year summer at Douglas. And from there, I just continued on the path to law.
So I also had two specific moments where I realized this was the career path that I wanted to pursue. So I came into Rutgers. I was political science major, international relations minor. My parents were pushing me to go to law school, and I was like, I don't know. It sounds interesting. I wasn't against it, but I wasn't passionate about it. And I was lucky enough to have taken this Burns seminar my freshman year, first semester, and it was called Ethical Dilemmas in Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And I was blown away, like, what is this? And I connected with the professor, and my friend made me get coffee with her, networking, and she ended up recommending me for this program that the Defense Intelligence Agency hosts. And so I was flown out to DC for 2 weeks, and we did simulations, and we were preparing briefs for people in different agencies like CIA, Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, and it was terrifying. It was high pressure. It was very intense, but I loved it. I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to think critically. I want to be on my toes. I want to be doing important analysis. So that's what really sealed it in for me.
Thank you so much. And you all three have like some similar kind of experiences and some different experiences. But one thing that I heard kind of across, all three is there was some sort of vote of confidence from someone or a nudge, from folks. So can you speak more to how mentorship and relationship building and networking has really impacted your career?
I think for me, it's your currency. And my mentor told me building relationships, networking is not just going to the dinner, going to the event or the association or the alumni event or some event while you're an intern or, navigating the space, while you're still in undergrad and just getting the business card and then sending, hey, thanks for meeting you, would love to connect. And then you guys never connect again, right? It's building that relationship. I know sometimes it's a little difficult because it's like you may be the undergraduate student and you're meeting this high-powered attorney or high-powered upper management person who's already in their career, and you're like, what am I going to say? What value do I bring them? But it's just kind of checking in. If you have to set a reminder to check in with that particular person over time, hey, let's meet for coffee. Can we meet for lunch? We're in the digital era. Let's have a quick Zoom call or a telephone call, but establishing that relationship. Maybe there's an interesting article that you can send, or, hey, just thinking about you, I saw this in the news. Maybe this may impact the work that you do. They probably have already seen it, but now they're thinking, wow, this person was actually thinking of me in that way and, my business and what I do. So it's not just, meeting the person, but I think it's also developing that relationship over time, and understanding that it's more of a means to an end sometimes. It's not just like, hey, we meet, I need a job. It's not that. And most times it's from what my mentors have told me, that they don't see a return on a relationship that they've had until maybe 20 years later or 10 years later. And you shouldn't go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to get something. I look at it, I want to learn from you. Like, what did you learn along your journey that I can do? What mistakes did you make that I can avoid? Looking at the wisdom that they can give to you. And if it turns out that something comes along the road years later, amazing. But at least you've established a relationship with someone who can know you as a person, your character, who you are as a young professional.
And I would agree with everything that Victoria just said, and realize two things. One, mentors have a lot to teach you, not just about what to do right, but sometimes your observations of mentors also teach you what not to do. If you see them make missteps, or maybe they can recognize their own and have that self-awareness and can share some of their mistakes. But in the absence of that self-awareness, your observation of them, how they're received, and maybe, you know, it could just be bosses and other folks, not just your mentors. They teach you a lot about leadership in terms of what to do, but also how not to do things. The other thing I would say, and I think we all know this, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. So a mentor is someone you have that relationship with, you can get advice from, but they may not be the one that is in the room that can advocate for you for a project or for an opportunity. And so you need mentors or sponsors all up and down the chain at various levels, so that it's not just you staying top of mind with a mentor, but it's a sponsor keeping you top of mind for others across the firm or business, so you'll be considered for opportunity.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And I guess it's so fresh in my mind because I graduated in 2019, so just last year. And I know I wouldn't be where I was today without my mentors at Rutgers and in Douglas and everything. I absolutely think that mentorship is key. Literally wouldn't have had my job without it. Not to say it's the only avenue, but it is extremely helpful. And I guess to add on to that, the one thing is it reminds me also of all the mentorship opportunities that I squandered because I was just so afraid to speak up. I felt like I was bothering people, or I didn't really know how to initiate the conversation. So I think just putting yourself out there and starting with some friendly relationship, it shouldn't be, hey, I know you're here, get me to there. So like building a repertoire with that person too.
Thank you so much for that, all of you. Those were really wonderful experiences and kind of different ways to look at mentorship as well as sponsorship. I mean, y'all can't see me, but I'm over here snapping like, yes, I love it. So all of you are in some form of public policy or law. So can you talk to the upsides as well as some downsides to being in that field of public policy and law?
Well, I think the upside for me, and again, I just ended a nearly 25-year career in public service about 3 years ago. And so the upside was the notion of being able to help people, set policies that had broad applicability, that you could improve the lives for folks or be an advocate for folks in spaces where they may not have known about or had any agency in. But I will admit the downside, at least that I experience, is they don't pay nearly enough or what they should. Let's be candid.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as you think about law school and other things, or whatever your career, I highly encourage a space and time for some public service, because I think it gives you a window into how the government works, which then can help you in any private career that you may have. But also just be smart with your finances. And maybe I wasn't as smart as I should have been during my public service career life, all cards on the table. But it's livable, and the rewards that you get are just, they're priceless. I miss my public service career tremendously.
Courtney, I think you were.
No, you.
For me, I do mainly just law. So for me, being at what we call big law, large law firm, 1,000 attorneys coast to coast, what I will say that working at a large law firm has afforded me was the pro bono opportunities, because we have the resources, we have the manpower to take on pro bono opportunities. And I've done some tremendous work with the ACLU in New Jersey. We just recently got an amazing favorable decision by the Supreme Court of New Jersey on a child abuse case, which was phenomenal, which will affect law going forward in terms of how they categorize the decision-making that they're doing for those particular matters. So I think if you're in a law firm, they have the pro bono opportunities that you can do without thinking about the resources, because the firm has the resources to expend on pro bono opportunities for people who really, really, really need representation. The downside for me being at a large law firm, one, you don't always have the time because you're constantly worrying about the clients and the billable hours that we say in this particular space. So the pro bono opportunities that I would love to take all the time, I can't always necessarily take. I can only take maybe a few, as opposed to maybe filling my time with doing all of that. So it definitely restricts the ability for you to do more pro bono work if that's something that you're interested in doing. So that's one of the downsides for me, I would say.
So mine is going to be a bit different because as an intelligence analyst, we work to inform policy, inform the policymakers so that they make policy. So I guess the big upside is that we get to do just that when it comes to the national security policies and procedures that are put forward and the DoD spending. Our decisions help to contribute, how much is allocated to us and how it's spent. I think there are two negatives that come to mind. So one is that it isn't as continuous. So the national security priorities can change very quickly and they can change under different administrations. For example, before this current administration, I think terrorism was still a pretty big priority. But when he came in, the Trump administration decided that great power competition was the direction that we needed to move in. So all of the cool, interesting counterterrorism classes that I took still have relevance, but it was a bit different than what my job required, which is fine. Still interesting. I like international relations, so I'm cool with that. But another con is our just daily movements are also very heavily outlined through policy too. So how we write intelligence projects, it's dictated by ICD, so Intelligence Community Directive 203, and they talk about very specifically how it's supposed to be written, what shouldn't be included in terms of like political biases or anything like that. But there's also the pressure of if I accidentally write unclassified on this document, I can go to jail and I can be tried as a spy of the United States. It's like, no, I didn't mean to press that. But you do learn to navigate that, so it's not too bad.
Thank you so much. Now, all of you, public service law as well as the intelligence fields are pretty well known to be dominated by men. So how can you speak to your experiences kind of navigating that field? Gwen, we know that, in DeKalb County that you were not only the first African-American, but also the first woman to hold that position. So can you talk about those spaces and places, of just navigating those areas?
Yeah. So when I took over as DA in particular, somebody came to me, and I don't know if he was trying to be helpful or not, but he said, well, you've got big shoes to fill. And I was like, yeah, but I'm going to be filling them with slingbacks instead of wingtips. So, you've just got to let folks know you've got to deconstruct the expectation that you're going to do it just like a man would. The whole point you're there is to do things differently. And you were selected, whether it's a job or by election, because folks want something different. So own that. And still be respectful. Obviously, we want to have men at the table, diverse groups, and all of that. But it is time for us to be able to be ourselves. And again, I look much better in slingbacks than I do in wingtips. So.
Does anyone else want to answer before we move on? If not, it's fine.
Sure. So very briefly, I think what we've really seen, at least in the intelligence community, is a massive influx of a younger workforce, a more racially, ethnically diverse workforce, and more parity when it comes to gender. What's good with that is that we call a lot of things that were typically just normalized into question, and we push for change. For example, in my office, you also do have like a heavy military component to it. So whatever culture that is in the military also translates there too. But when you have a civilian workforce who's like, no, we're not putting up with this, we start to have diversity town halls, and we start to have senior leadership question, what is the actual culture and climate, and how can we enforce that? And how can we use these mechanisms that we've put in place to actually serve their purpose? So I think also to what Gwendolyn was saying, they want something different too. So we are being encouraged to speak more, to express what our viewpoints are, and to really carve a place for us in the room at the table. So I think it does have its challenges, but when you have people who are like, I'm here for a purpose and I'm here in the same room as you for a reason, that you do push for more change.
Yeah, just to add on really quickly, understanding that you as a woman of color, you have value. You have value in the space that you're in. And I remember when I first started, a comment was made that a colleague who was more senior than I was, who was a white counterpart of mine, did it this way. And for a long time, I was wondering, like, why am I not living up to the standard? Am I not living up to what they're expecting? Because that's all they've expected. I was probably the first in my group. But I had to come to a place where I realized that I'm not going to do it like him. I'm going to do it in my own lane. I have my own journey, to embark on in this space. And recognizing, like we all said, that you bring value in the world experiences that you've had, in your perspective, in the experiences that you've had, you bring value to that into the workplace. And I'm not going to do it like him. I'm going to do it like me. And it's just going to be excellent. And if not better than what, someone else did, and understanding that our diversity is not a hindrance, but rather it's a value that we have in these spaces.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think really understanding how diversity is so diverse, right? Like how it can mean so many different things, and how, so many of our identities just kind of really intersect in how we create the spaces that we're in, and we show up in those spaces. So thank you all so much for that. You all touched on some form of change and doing things differently. And one of the things that we've been doing really differently lately is COVID-19, right? It really just changed the way that the world is operating. So my next question is really about, how did COVID-19 change your field of work, if at all?
Oh, the list is long. Starting with, I just put you guys on mute because my teenage boys were fighting downstairs and I could hear them, and I was hoping that you couldn't. So I was texting my husband, shut the boys up. That's just one of the things, right? We are juggling, for those of us that have others that we live with, we're trying to juggle the space of being home. And in some ways that's great. I had a job where, because of business development, I was on the road almost every week of the month trying to meet new people or speaking or out. And we're a family that normally has dinners together, but when you're gone a couple of nights, that can be difficult. It throws off the schedule. And so now the good thing about it, and obviously COVID is horrendous. We've lost over 200,000 souls. But I get more dedicated talk time with my kids. They'll take a break from school and come up and give me a hug in the middle of a meeting. So it's really changed my priorities going forward. I used to go into an office 5 days a week. Now I'm thinking I might flip that, and go in 1, stay home 4, just so I can stay connected with folks in the office. Thankfully for me, many of my clients are either in the healthcare space or a chemical space that is still relevant to the pandemic. So I have not seen a decrease in business or anything that affects me that way. But mine is a firm that back in March, we made the difficult decision to give pay cuts to the members in order to save layoffs or furloughs from anybody else in the firm. We absorbed the uncertainty. So that's been a challenge. So I think, if anything, the pandemic has taught us how to be flexible. It's taught us how to be resilient. And I'm hoping it's taught us how to think about others rather than ourselves first. This is not a space where you can be selfish. And again, that kind of goes back to the public service ethos. Try to think about things bigger than yourself and how you can contribute. So that for me, that there are benefits and negatives, and I'm just trying to stay focused on the positive as we go forward, because there's no telling how long this will be. I was going to say, being an at-home teacher, at-home school teacher, while also trying to be a partner in a law firm, that's a whole new challenge.
That's definitely a tough one. COVID-19, I think it's affected the legal industry. It really depends on the particular area of the law, the particular business. Some businesses like healthcare, they're booming, right? Because it's healthcare and we're in a pandemic. Other businesses, whether you're the restaurant industry or some other, retail industry, you've been affected significantly just because of the stay-at-home orders, the quarantine, all of the different things that have just ravaged all of us, not as a nation, but globally. So that's made some things a little bit slower for some industries. But I think, like what Gwen was saying earlier, that it's taught us to be flexible. Like, you can literally do, at least for the law practice, everything virtual. I've had court appearances via Zoom where we normally would have gone into the courthouse and I would have been before a judge. We've had it via Zoom. We've had telephone conferences. I know other attorneys have had depositions via Zoom, which is like, whoa, because that's never happened unless you're like video conferencing. But everything can be virtual or in some kind of digital form. And I think it's taught a lot of us to be resilient and be more creative. Okay, we can't do this, but how can we still service the client? How can we still produce a good work product with the parameters that we have? And I think it also has just, for me personally, shifted the priority, like Gwen was saying before. I think that before I was in the office 5, maybe 6 days a week, and now I'm recognizing that there are other things that I could be doing, other ways that I can plug in, whether it's joining an organization or doing some more pro bono opportunities. And I think it's really shown me and some of my other colleagues that as attorneys, we have a certain level of privilege. And how am I using my attorney license to better the lives of other people or to help other people who are not situated in the space that I am situated through pro bono opportunities, not just seeing things happen on TV, but how am I using my level of privilege to help those other individuals out in the spaces that they need assistance with? And I don't think it would have been as much on the forefront had it not been for the pandemic that we're all still facing.
Thank you so much. So one of my next questions, and as we kind of shift into the last half of our panel, I want to invite our audience to drop any questions they have in the Q&A feature, and we'll be happy to moderate those for you in the last 15-20 minutes of this session. So my next question is, how do you stay motivated to continue to do your work, even when it can become emotionally draining? That's a loaded question.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right?
You know, part of the motivation is doing things like this, like getting to see Victoria and Courtney and where they are in their career. You guys have the world open to you. Certainly the students at Douglas do as well. I'll be honest, it's going to get hard. Like, don't let anybody tell you that it's not, or don't let people tell you that you're less than because you've experienced challenges or bad times. That's not a reflection on you. Those are just opportunities. And so I think that's how I get through it. Bad days are going to come. The question is, are you going to let them just kind of bowl you under, or are you going to put them in perspective and say, okay, is this something I can fix? Let's put our energy there. If it's not something I can fix, it's certainly something I can learn from for next time. But the other thing I would encourage is to find your passion, whatever you love. I do a boot camp every morning that I work out, and it just, makes me feel like a badass when I can lift weights and, go with these pretty vigorous exercise routines. But I'm also a nature girl. For the first time, ever, I started my own garden this year because of the pandemic. And so, we've taken hikes for Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, just doing more things to get out, because the one bad thing about the pandemic is there's no real difference between work and home. Like literally, I work more hours now simply because all of that travel time is now spent at home.
Mhm.
So I have to be deliberate about getting up, getting some fresh air, going out. And so just find the things or stay in touch with the things that you have always loved, and find new things, new folks to interact with, whether it's, virtually or otherwise, to keep you going, because, and just know those times are going to come. They're not an effect on you. You can't control them from coming, but you can control your response to them.
I'm sorry, my internet connection had dropped, so I didn't hear the question. Would we be able to repeat it?
Sure. So the question was, how do you stay motivated to continue to do your work, even when it can become emotionally draining?
Okay. I think that, I guess coming out of Rutgers, remembering all the conversations about balance and mental health, I put that at the forefront of my mind coming into work, and I set clear boundaries with myself too. So, I mean, it's also a bit different with COVID because I was out of the office for almost 4 months, and then I come back and I rotate every 2 weeks. So it's not that same level of 9 to 5 plus every single day, every single week, every month. So I guess during that time, I also reflected like, how is this working out for me? How am I balancing my first real career out of college? And how do I deal with the burnout? Because that is definitely an aspect when you're in a new space and you're overwhelmed and you're trying to figure out the subject matter and all the classification stuff. It's overwhelming. Um, Part of that, I guess, also repeating what Gwen said, is figuring out what de-stresses you and making time for that. So on the weekends or after work, I started working out more, I started reading, I started watching more 90 Day Fiance, because that was my opportunity to just detach myself and recollect and recenter.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. For me, it's recognizing that my job, being an attorney, is not who I am. It's what I do. And for a long time, well, not a long time, but just the 3 years that I've been practicing in law school, I didn't see it as a separate thing. I saw it as, this is who I am. But the pandemic has really shown me, like, being an attorney is not who I am. It's what I do. It's the service that I bring into this world. But who am I at the core? What am I passionate about? What brings me joy? What makes me light up? And the pandemic has definitely shown me that, because I have experienced burnout. I have experienced times where I'm like, wow, this is a really tough week. One challenge after the other, one challenge after the other. But recognizing, like Gwen was saying, was that it's not you, and it's not going to be forever. You may be in a season where this is really challenging right now, but the next season is going to be a horizon. And understanding that the season that I'm in, maybe it's challenging, maybe I've had a couple of weeks that have been very tough, but understanding that it's just a season and it's only temporary, and plugging into the other things that bring me joy, whether it's, me being involved with my local church and the youth group and just plugging in there and just serving there, or, working out. I work out 3 days a week now. Didn't do that prior to the pandemic, but now I can't think about not doing it now, because I enjoy that time, because during that hour, I don't really have to use any analytical reasoning. I'm just working out, right? So just finding the things that you're passionate about, that brings you joy and lights you up outside of the work that you're doing, has really been helping me.
Awesome, thank you. So before we get started, we have a couple of questions from our attendees. I actually have a question. I have a 14-year-old, and I'm also teacher and employee and housekeeper. So I guess this question is specifically for Gwen. Tips, advice for those of us with children and working and doing
let's just say my kids have been out of school since March, and I certainly did not win any Teacher of the Year awards last semester, and I'm not going to win them this semester. Might not even win Mom of the Year awards. And I think it's important to step back and realize that this is just crazy, right? These are crazy times. There is no playbook. There really shouldn't be an expectation. And give yourself some grace in this space. That it's okay not to be perfect every day. It's okay not to be okay every day. And kind of, say, all right, let's set some goals for the week. Let's set some goals for the day. I hate to say this. I just told my kids, if you can set it up so mommy gets no emails about late assignments, I will give you extra in your allowance during the week. Like, whatever the motivation has to be to get us all through this without screaming and yelling. And, because if I get upset, that upsets them. Like, how can we do this together? You have to do your classes. Mommy hates getting the emails. What does mommy need to do so she doesn't get the emails and you don't get yelled at? So it takes some creativity. It takes some grace. But again, think about the stories your kids will get to tell when they're our age about this moment, right? And what do you want that story to be? Gosh, it was horrible. I couldn't get through it. Or my parents really taught me how to be resilient and adapt. And so I'm trying to do the latter. I don't get it right, but that's part of resiliency, that you've got to be flexible and just constantly trying to do better. But girl, I know what you mean.
Yes, listen, it's been a whole, my son it's just him, and he loves to he's a social butterfly. And I'm like, we don't need you catching COVID. So balancing that, and, it's a whole thing. All right, so we have some questions here from our attendees. I'm so excited to get to these. Our first question is, how can you recognize a mentoring opportunity? What does that look like?
Well, I guess, so mentoring opportunity, like identifying a mentor, so I guess I can say, maybe you're at an event, maybe there's, Douglas is having an event, or there's an event going on, or maybe there's a panel discussion, or just something where you're meeting other people of influence or other people who are doing certain things that you may be interested in, whether they're already in the industry, whatever level they're at. I always try to find, if it's a panel discussion, usually at the end, panelists usually allow people to, we're virtual now, but typically in a space, you can come up to the panelists afterwards and have a conversation. I always look for things, if they're saying something that really resonates with me, their story, or maybe they're passionate about their work, or just whatever they've said that I feel like really resonates with me, that's usually how I make a connection, where I identify someone like, wow, this person, their story just blew me away, or maybe they're just passionate about their work and I want to hear more about it. I'll identify that person, go up to them at the event or a panel, or maybe we're virtual now, maybe you send a message to someone on LinkedIn or an email saying, hey, your story really resonated with me, or you're so passionate about your work. That's something that I'm looking towards. And that's how I usually identify someone as a mentor that I want to make a connection with, whether it's their passion, whether they're in an industry that I want to be in, whether they're years above me and I'm just trying to figure out how they got there. Those are the ways that I'm able to identify it. Or sometimes you may not be at a panel or a discussion and you just see someone's LinkedIn profile. Because sometimes you're like, wow, this person did all these things. How did they do that? It never hurts to send a message to someone saying, hey, I see that you worked here, you worked here, you worked here, and we have the Douglas connection. Can we connect? So those are some of the ways that I identify a potential mentor and then make that connection from there.
Yes, and I think sometimes you don't fully recognize a mentor at first, and don't beat yourself up about that either. So with my teacher, I didn't look at her and say she's going to get me to where I want to go, or she's going to be a great, comrade in my fight for employment, but that relationship formed over time. So what I tend to do is, if I'm at an event, if I have an internship, I get contact information. And then I reach out afterwards. Thank you for having me. Thank you for speaking. It was interesting hearing XYZ. And later down the line, sometimes there's a connection to their former industry or their former organization where I'd love to hear about their experience and say, oh, I'm interested in that. So I think I tend to take the approach of getting down that contact information in case I wanted to use it for later. But yeah, that's basically it.
And I would agree with everything that's said. I think the other thing I would add to that is anytime someone tells you, call me, or let's sit down and talk about that, take them up on it. That is your entryway to eliminate any intimidation, question. I don't know if they might be too busy. I don't want to bother them. Folks don't say that unless they've gotten to a point in the career where they are about bringing up the next generation, making sure that they may be the first, but again, they don't want to be the last. So always take advantage, take people up on that invitation.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one quick thing. Also, too, don't write off other people as mentors who don't necessarily look like you, right? Don't only look for mentors in, if I'm African American, they have to be African American, or if I'm Latinx, they have to be Latinx, or if they're a woman, they have to be a woman. While that would be amazing, right? We want that, but there's so many other people who are good at the core, who also care, who also want to pour into you, who also want to see you do well. And that's something that I had to learn early on, that a mentor can come from anywhere. It could be someone who's a white male who's well into their career and they have some gems in wisdom that they can give me. So don't close off anyone as a mentor just because the person's not a woman, they're not a person of color. You can always find something to learn from somebody, whether they're a woman, person of color, not person of color. You can learn from essentially anyone.
And I would actually encourage folks to go out and find those non-minority mentors, because hopefully that mentorship will turn into a sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Very often, because of the systemic racism and other injustices, that room isn't filled with people that look like us yet. Mm-hmm. Keep folks who don't look like us to help you and others get in the room. So don't close the door on some opportunities just because mentors don't look like or act like you think they should. We're just not there yet.
No. Yes, I think that is an amazing piece of advice. That is, sometimes mentorship can turn into sponsorship, right? Or, they don't always have to be two separate people, but understanding how to navigate that relationship to really make it mutually beneficial. Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. Our next question comes from Sarah. Sarah says, hi, panelists. I'd love to hear any advice you might have for making the most of entry-level and undergraduate experiences and using them as steps on a ladder to long-term career goals.
Fully immerse yourself in your undergraduate experience. Just fully immerse yourself. And obviously, your grades shouldn't suffer from immersing too much, but if there's a leadership opportunity, I think it was on the last panel we were on, where Rutgers University has so many different organizations and affinity groups that you can be a part of, where you can get a taste of a leadership position. Go and do it. Do it, because the skills, the interpersonal skills that you learn from those times where you're either serving on a student congress board or an affinity group, those skills are transferable into your entry-level position, into the job that you have, and do as many programs as you can do. That's what I did, because I recognized that I wanted to have a trajectory to going to law school and being an attorney. So I made sure that I picked organizations, internship program opportunities that painted a story that, okay, she did this and she did this and she did that. And it paints the story, okay, she wants to be an attorney, she wants to go to law school. So there's so many different internship opportunities, externships, organizational opportunities that Rutgers University has to offer. Immerse yourself in it and just do it, because that helps to build your resume, it helps to build your credibility, it helps to build your brand, and it just transfers over when you're entry level or you're navigating certain spaces.
The other thing I would recommend is very often in those internship opportunities, there is some sort of social aspect where the attorney, at least in the legal realm, the attorneys that you may be working with or receiving assignments from, that's one way to build relationships and make your reputation known. But at these social events, you'll meet folks outside of that area. And I would encourage you to pick up the phone and call them, even if you're not doing any work for them. It gives you an opportunity not just to learn about the substance, but to build the relationships that we were just talking about in relation to the last question. And then after the internship is over, to I think Courtney and Victoria's point earlier, if there's an article that comes up in the space where you used to work, send it to them. Say, hey, I saw this. This is what I think. What do you think? And also recognize that very often these internship opportunities are your access to get to the higher level folks at the firm, whereas you may be working only with middle management. So again, take advantage of that socialization to get on the radar screen of folks that will be making some high level decisions, because you never know how broad their network is. And that's the power of networking, is capitalizing or compounding your network to take advantage of everybody else's as well.
So I think one big thing that I did was I looked at jobs that I wanted to have after graduation. I looked at the requirements and I figured out how I could fulfill those requirements. For example, when it came to my big decision, if I wanted to do the intelligence community or the United Nations, like Security Council, I was equally pursuing both. So I was doing internships, fellowships, research opportunities that happened to align with both. And then when I was waiting on my clearance process, I looked at other opportunities that could still get me to my end goal. So I know the United Nations, they value nonprofit experience, and that's why I applied to TED. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with TED Talks, but I worked there the summer after my graduation, and it furthered my knowledge on international relations, making connections, communication, all of that, while gaining, time and grade for the nonprofit work. I think having a long-term goal and intentionally making steps towards that is a very valuable tool.
Wonderful, thank you. Victoria, we have a question for you. What was the program that simulated law school called? What was that program called?
Seton Hall Pre-Legal Studies Institute. So if you Google like Seton Hall Pre-Legal Studies Institute, it should pop up. So many great people. The new first African-American Supreme Court Justice for New Jersey, who's just been appointed, she was a pre-legal alum. She did the same program that I did when she was back as a undergraduate student, and just so many other federal judges, just phenomenal people in the legal industry did that program when they were like freshmen, in their freshman and their sophomore year. So if you Google it, you'll see it. It's a summer-long program where it was virtual this year, but typically you stay on campus for 6 to 8 weeks and you're just immersed as a first-year law student, like immersed. So at the end of the program, you know whether you want to go to law school. If you don't, it's better, you save the money, but at the end of it, if you do, okay, I can make it through because I've done this this process. So definitely do it if you have an opportunity to do so before you graduate.
Wonderful, thank you for that information. All right, our next question comes from Emily. She says, most of you have mentioned some kind of DC internship as part of your educational experience. But with the pandemic, internship and externship opportunities, I'm sure, will become hard to find. What are other ways to get involved with public service and gain experience?
So for me, I actually, aside from my DIA experience, I did not do anything in DC. I interned in New Jersey at the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. I interned at the Rutgers, the name is different now, but the Center for Intelligence Studies. And I'm not sure how New York will be, but I interned at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. So I think there are so many resources on campus and near campus where you don't have to travel to DC. Also, the fellowship that I did, it's called the Lloyd C. Gardner Fellowship. Anyone who's a sophomore or junior, I would start to look at that you look at international issues, and you can be from any background, from any school in Rutgers. And then you do kind of like a thesis. I would also recommend doing your thesis. So mine was motivating factors behind suicide terrorism. And I was partnered with someone from the poli-sci department, and we did this huge research project, which I can say on my resume, I executed an independent research project on this topic, and I used these databases and these resources, which I still talk about now in interviews. So don't think you have to go to DC or to another country or something in order to gain valuable experience.
Well, and I think, in the beginning when the pandemic started, a lot of companies were trying to figure it all out, but now 6-7 months in, they're starting to get a rhythm about what they're doing. And I know law firms, for example, a lot of them had summer associate programs that were completely online. We didn't get together, but we were still able to do Zoom happy hours or, give assignments by email. So I think it still goes back to identify the space that you're interested in, like Courtney said, and then call them and ask them what their their virtual equivalent is going to be, or, do like I did, can I volunteer in some virtual way? And see what that opens up. It definitely demonstrates your initiative and interest, which again, should be something that sets you apart from the pack.
Thank you so much. I do want to do a shameless plug for the PLEN program that we have here at Douglas. PLEN is an acronym for Public Leadership Education Network. We have about 3 cohorts every year that some run in the winter time, some run in like May, and then in the fall. So there's definitely an opportunity to partake in that at this time. This year, PLEN is virtual, which means that we have extra money to send extra students. So please apply. Please read your Douglas Delivers, because PLEN applications are open right now. All right.
You have it.
All right, and I think this is going to be our last question, and this question comes from Pooja. Pooja says, how did you find the intersection of your passion and your career/professional development? Did you have to sacrifice your personal beliefs when working for an organization or company? That's a nice one.
That's a loaded question.
Right? That's a nice ending question.
And it's interesting because a friend just talked about this the other day, and I was trying to remember how he phrased it. But there's this sphere of influence and sphere of control, and ideally those two overlap completely, or they may be concentric circles. But what you're trying to do is maximize the overlap so that you don't feel like you are in an uncomfortable or inauthentic space. And I don't know about Victoria. I think for me, having been an advocate for communities and government for so long, it was very different to come to the private side and represent many of those companies that are experiencing challenges and questions from communities. And so it did take, I'm fortunate in that the clients that we have are progressive and proactive and want to build relationships with communities as opposed to ignoring them. So I try to be a part of that solution and sort of stand in the gap and bring the two sides together. But that's something that I hope I can maintain throughout my career. My firm is very flexible in letting us decide who our clients are. And so, I have not experienced a conflict, but I've been very lucky, again, spending most of my time in government, and now even in the 3 years into the private sector, I have the flexibilities to still be true to myself. And so I, to the extent you can, try to find a job that allows you to do just that, have both of your circles overlap in a way that is most comfortable for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't gotten there yet. Being 3 years out, I haven't found a way to merge the two yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. But what I can say, to Gwen's point about some of the organizations or companies that we represent that other communities, question, one thing I've told myself, and I haven't had a situation where I've had to, felt like I was moving away from my moral compass. But what I do is I recognize that I'm in a space where they probably wouldn't have interacted with an African-American attorney like myself or other diverse attorneys outside of me being in this particular position. And I bring a unique perspective. And that unique perspective, has an effect on how we carry out the litigation, has an effect on maybe the way we strategize certain things, or maybe it's something that I can say like, hey, have you thought about this? This is how others may perceive it, to the extent that I can as a junior attorney, but understanding that I can still, foster the way people experience me, the way people experience my practice of law in a way that resonates with them, in a way that doesn't require me to shift my moral compass. I remember sitting in, this was when I was an intern, it was a mediation where we represent the management side, so the company, and there was the employee challenging, certain actions that happened. And in that moment, I felt so bad because it was an immigrant who was on the other side, obviously, not obviously, but from a lower in socioeconomic status. And here I am as an African-American woman sitting on the management side. And I felt like, wow, am I on the, and then the mediator said to me as the intern, he said, you're on the wrong side. And then I was like, am I on the wrong side? But then I had to say to myself in that moment that while I'm on this side, I have a duty, I have a responsibility to navigate this space with my unique perspective, making teachable moments to people who probably never had to question certain actions and making them think a little bit further. And I think if most corporations have people who have these unique experiences, we wouldn't see some of the ads that come out. We wouldn't see some of the catastrophic things that come out and you're like, was anyone on the board? So I think when you're in that space, you have that opportunity to do so. So hopefully in the future, I have merged the two a little bit better, but that's where I am for right now.
Super fast, I know it's 2 o'clock. What you said just now, Victoria, really resonated with me because I have found myself in the midst of some very problematic conversations and feeling stuck. Like, do I say something, especially since these are my superiors making these comments, or do I not? And I've made myself a walking, respectful, teachable moment. Yeah. So a lot of, especially with what's been happening internationally now, it's just, sometimes people don't realize how racist, problematic, sexist their statements are, and they won't realize it until someone says something. So taking away that sense of normalcy and making those comments has been the biggest challenge in making this transition. But I mean, to answer the first part of the question, I have yet to find the merging of passion with the subject matter with my career. I do like the level of work that I do, but the topics I'm still working towards, and that's what's great about being inside. It's easier to move around than it is to get your foot in the door. So I've used my current position as an opportunity to get to where I want to go.
The only other thing that I would add, and I know we're very close past time, is always remember that your career is a series of opportunities. So even though something may feel less comfortable now, you are learning with inside knowledge that will help you if you decide to switch sides later. So to Victoria's point, what she's learning now as part of the management team will help her if she ever decides to stand up for folks on the other side, because now she knows how the opponents think. So think of it long-term as opposed to just discomfort you're experiencing now. It's all a learning opportunity you could use later in your career.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of our attendee questions that we had. I think that was an awesome way to end this panel. Thank you to Gwen, Courtney, and Victoria for being here. For all of our attendees, I have dropped a link to get you to yoga if you choose to do so at 2 o'clock. It'll be nice to kind of, take a breeze down from public service, policy, and law, and to get some yoga on for 15 minutes. Thank you so much for choosing this breakout session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.